everyone. Welcome to the new talk, the Global Legal Tech Hub. It's a pleasure that everyone that's been there. Today, we're gonna be in these 3 talks regarding to the Metaverse. It's gonna be awesome. It's really good panelists in this time. We got Stefan Ritter, we got Carlos Escapa, and we got also Megan Golden. Yeah, thank you very much for being there. It's a pleasure to have you here. We got people from every single part. We got Megan from Washington and Carlos and Stefan in the West Coast in the US and Barcelona. So it's great that everyone is in a different timeline. So thank you very much for your time. And we're going to discuss about what's the Metaverse, what's your point of view. But before that, we're going to introduce them. Who are they? We're going to start with Megan. Megan is partner in Clifford. We got Carlos. Carlos is from Facebook EI, and Stefan, he's from Mitek. So for that, I would like you to present you, that explain us what about you and what's your relation to the Metaverse. So please, Megan, go ahead, explain us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, hi, and thanks for having me today. I'm Megan Gordon. I'm a partner in the Washington office of Clifford Chance. I'm also one of the leaders of our tech group here at Clifford Chance. And my relationship with the Metaverse is from a legal perspective. As part of the Clifford Chance tech group, we are not just heavily interested, but following this, seeing how it's evolving as a legal issue. We're doing deals involving the Metaverse. We're dealing with regulatory issues involving the Metaverse. So this is of key importance to a lot of our clients, to pretty much, I think, everybody in the world now. So, as the world changes, we as a law firm are always looking to what's ahead for our clients and what's ahead in the legal world. So that's what I've been doing so far with it. It's been really exciting.
Carlos, what about you? Explain us a little bit more. What's your relation to the Metaverse?
Well, hello, everybody. I am Carlos Escapa. I work at, what used to be known as Facebook is now known as Meta in the AI research group. And my task is mostly to work on the foundational technologies that are being transported, if you will, from machine learning into constructs that can be used to develop Metaverse building blocks and technologies associated with it. And I also manage the alliances for Meta with the major AI partners in the industry, like Google, like Amazon, Microsoft, and so on.
Stefan, your turn. Stefan, it's your turn.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, nice to meet everyone here. I'm Stephen Ritter, CTO, Chief Technology Officer for Mitek Systems. At Mitek, I focus on digital identity and machine learning. So that's a pretty obvious relationship to the Metaverse, but also I'm a lifetime gamer and early adopter of virtual reality. So I, for one, am waiting for a more realistic Metaverse.
Well, thank you very much for the 3 panelists. Well, I'm the moderator this time. I'm Joaquim Matinero from RocaJunyent, a Spanish law firm, and related to finance, banking, and blockchain technology. So I think it's going to be great. Just to note to the audience that the next talk related to the Metaverse will be the 12th of May. That will be the link on the chat. So let's go. Let's gonna start. I know that some of the panelists has to rush because they have to do lots of things. So maybe they will left the panel at the end, but if you have any question, please provide us and we'll try to answer as soon as possible. So let's gonna start. We are talking about technology. We're talking regarding Metaverse. I think one of the first questions is what's the role that will Meta play in that Metaverse? Carlos, can you explain us a little bit more?
Well, Meta is going to propose solutions, partnerships. It is also going to supply a lot of software to participate in the Metaverse. So it's going to be both a provider of technology and platform, as well as a host that will have solutions and products that would be provided in this new way, that immersive way, that people can interact with providers of products and services. All of this is very much in construction, I should say. And people often confuse Meta and Metaverse. Meta is the name of the company. Metaverse is a concept that predates Meta and predates Facebook. It is just basically a change of the name of the company in anticipation of the rise of this technology, and basically supplanting many of the ways that we have been interacting electronically in the last 2 or 3 decades since the internet started.
Wow. Megan, have you seen any legal issues from the Metaverse so far, or are you expecting a great dispute resolution regarding to that? What's your point of view?
Yeah, so well, we're already seeing some issues arising. So first of all, I think it's interesting because a lot of people think that the metaverse, I think the metaverse is already here. We're seeing the very beginning stages of it, and I think it's been here for a while. So, you know, I always think when you look at the fact that we're very comfortable with NFTs now, the fact that all the gamers like Steven, and I will also put myself into that category, are very comfortable paying real money for virtual items in games. So the Roblox environment, the Fortnite environment, the Minecraft environment, all of these things, I kind of say have trained us to get ready for the metaverse. The fact that we're moving to more digital assets, more cryptocurrency, those things to me are all building blocks into what the metaverse will be one day, which of course Carlos and Steven are going to, you know, help design from a technical standpoint. But from a legal standpoint, some of the issues that are already coming up are of course dealing with IP and trademark. I think everybody have probably heard of the Meta Birkin incident, let's call it, that happened in January of this year in 2022. An artist NFT provider, he designed an NFT which kind of looks like a Birkin bag. For those of you who know Birkin bags, they're really expensive bags from Hermes if you do not know them. Anyway, he created an NFT that was kind of a furry Birkin, let's say, and Hermes sued in January 2022. They issued a cease and desist order. Last month, February, he filed a motion to dismiss, and we're going to see how trademarks and different IP work out in the metaverse. Other issues that I think are coming and are already really there in terms of building blocks, cryptocurrency, how that is regulated, how different financial crimes compliance works, privacy, I think an issue that we all know well, and you know, is going to become a data governance. Who owns data? I'm sure that, you know, companies like Facebook, for instance, are, I know, very involved in those types of activities. We're already seeing healthcare and medicine come about in the metaverse. How does that work? How does healthcare data transfer? I mean, it's interesting because as we say, they're starting to design virtual operating rooms. I don't, you know, how are we all going to feel about that when operations are done via robotics and the doctors on the other end doing robots? So that's all going to rate who's liable, which country, which jurisdiction applies. All of those things are going to be interesting. But I think the major issue coming about kind of just on a foundational level is, what is the metaverse going to look like? Are we going to have kind of more of a Web 2.0 environment where we kind of have the large companies owning major pieces of the market? And right now, are we just kind of seeing the who's going to win out in terms of the platform? I had to bring this book on because whenever I think of it, I think of antitrust, I think of Ready Player One, because Ready Player One really presents a huge antitrust issue in a metaverse environment. So the Oasis was a monopoly. It doesn't exist, so we can talk about it, but that's what it was. That owned almost everything in society, and you had a couple of big behemoths. So are we going to see that in terms of metaverse? How does that work in terms of interoperability from a technical sense if we don't? And are we going to have these major platforms owning things? Or are we going to be in a true Web 3.0 blockchain environment where it's more dispersed? And if it is more dispersed, how does that work in terms of technical interoperability and data? So I could talk about it forever because there's things about racial identity and diversity, but there's so many things that come up when you move into a different environment, and a lot of exciting things as well. So I'm not just saying that it's all problems, but a lot of you know, a lot of interesting issues. And I'm, you know, I'd love to hear from others, especially Carlos and Steven, you know, how you're thinking of, especially what it's going to look like.
Yeah, you just pointed out something that it's really interesting. It's how it's gonna be everyone connected. We got to Stephen that I think that he could explain from the identity point of view that related to these avatars, how this digital identity will be constructed in the metaverse and how we're gonna deal with that, because it's really interesting how player number one explained that, but what's real to that? Stephen, please provide us a little bit of light on that.
Well, I think it's clear that identity is going to be a really important issue. In fact, a lot of what Megan talked about around ownership and intellectual property and and jurisdiction, how are these things sorted out? They really have at their foundation this concept of identity, right? And what is identity? In like on the internet, everyone's a dog, right? So what is identity in the metaverse? And I think a really interesting question that we're posing at Mitek right now is it required for it to always be your quote unquote real identity, right? I've been using the internet for a long time. Sounds like Carlos has as well. And I think being able to be anonymous in the right environment is powerful, right? And I think it's important. So I think one of the base tenets is we're all going to have to figure out how to require the right amount of identity assurance for each different interaction, each different use case, right? I think the fortunate thing is there's a lot of technical underpinnings that are already available for us to use. And in fact, I just want to recognize one statement. I'm watching the chat as well. So I think it's, I hope I get the name right. Nonopa Vanda said to everybody, this concept of centralized decentralization, right? I think decentralization is a fascinating trend right now, kind of not just in the digital world, but I think socially as well. And what that leads me to believe is that, you know, it's going to be a multi-metaverse. In fact, I think it has to be a multi-metaverse. It can't be a single offering like Ready Player One, great movie, by the way. It's going to have to be a multi-metaverse. Now, I would actually love to hear some from Carlos on how Meta is working with other players in the space, no pun intended, right, around that. Because I think, you know, and specifically, something that we're thinking deeply about at Mitek is, you know, how do we create digital identities, right, with the right level of identity assurance? But then if and how do those identities move across different metaverse platforms?
Yeah, Carlos, go ahead, because we want to know how metaverses or Meta with other metaverses will be connected. And also, are the citizens ready to live in different worlds on a parallel world, but connected to them? Because we're going to connect metaverses to the real world. How do you think that's going to be solved, and how Meta is experiencing this, I don't know, this Copernican revolution?
Well, the honest answer is I don't know. And we don't know yet how that is going to pan out. A lot of people are establishing this comparison that we are with the metaverse where we were with the internet in the 1960s or 70s. But that is not a good analogy, because the internet was a single force. It was a single protocol that was adopted gradually from the Department of Defense in the US to universities, and then it made it to the commercial world. Whereas the multiverse is a concept that is actually still very much under definition, but it has something to do with a much richer interaction. Electronic interaction is going to be more three-dimensional. It is going to be more contextual. It's going to allow people to collaborate and coordinate much easier among them. And I expect that this is going to be a gradual evolution. If you look at the country that is most advanced today with the metaverse, I would say it is South Korea. That's probably where you have the most momentum at the moment in the market, and that very much is on the back of the gaming interest that there is in that country that is absolutely huge. I think you're all aware of these ginormous events that are set up to watch people play games in competitions. They're almost like a new sport, not almost, it is like a new sport. And what we see at the moment, for instance, Naver, the most advanced company in South Korea that is already very active in this space, has two platforms. One is called Zepeto, which is purely virtual, and then the other one is called Arcverse, which is both virtual and physical. And it's very interesting to note how an ecosystem has been formed around it, and the South Korean government, in fact, has been very involved, almost like militant, about developing this market. And then, so you actually have K-pop very much into the, I was going to say into the game, into the development of these platforms and providing content. So it kind of started with gaming, but now it is more of a cultural phenomenon and a way for people to connect and to enjoy each other. So this is, I think, a little bit of a glimpse of how this is going to develop, and it is very likely that we will have multiple platforms. And at the moment, the Oculus Quest, which is the device for entering a metaversical space as created by Meta and its company, its different divisions, it's exclusive. It does not connect into other metaverses. Will it in the future? Well, Stephen is asking the right question. I hope so. I think that would be a good thing to do. But then immediately the question is, okay, so when you put on the glasses, how do you identify yourself? How do you create an account? How do you define the resources or the, whether they're tokens or money or whatever it happens to be, that you are going to use in order to get services or paying services? That's all under construction at the moment. I think that when Stephen said multiverses, that is likely to happen. And if you look at this from a much wider point of view, we're already seeing a fragmentation of the internet. China was the first. We are unfortunately headed down the path very, very quickly for Russia also to create a different space. So it's a little difficult to predict now how this is going to pan out, that it is more likely to be fragmented than not. That's my vantage point at today in April 2022.
Well, before going to all these questions that you said, well, we are in early stage, things are moving really fast. South Korea is on the heads of that. And for sure, I want to ask one question, and maybe Stephen could answer to that. What's happened, or if it's possible that anyone could steal our identity in this new ecosystem? We don't know how from a technical point of view, that it's possible. If it's not, people is worried about it.
Absolutely. And I think in general, there are a lot of people concerned about, I would say, security in general within the metaverse, right? Especially considering that a lot of the early adopters already are children, right? So security and making sure that people are free from predators and that fraud is at a minimum is really important. Unfortunately, I'm a realist and I work in the probabilistic world of machine learning, as Carlos does. There is no 100% guarantee, and there almost certainly is going to be some fraud and some theft. I think the goal here is to make sure that we can measure it, detect it, and then fight against it. So on the identity front, Megan mentioned earlier that the metaverse has already started in many different ways, right? Even just with the recent pandemic that hopefully the world is coming out of right now, we all had to adopt a lot more virtual interaction as required by our schools and our jobs. And I think a lot of people were doing that for the first time, right? And a lot of people, we saw a lot of people creating digital identities and starting to use digital services for the first time during the pandemic, right? So we're learning how to do these things. And as an industry, I think we're learning how to do a better job of reducing that fraud risk, but it's not gone completely. Biometrics are a really important part. Mitek has invested heavily in biometrics, but at the same time, right? And this is one of the big challenges I think we all have to face is, there's a trade-off, I think, between maybe security and convenience, right? And as we make solutions more secure, they may become less convenient, right? Some of us may, hopefully many of us have used multi-factor authentication to protect some of our accounts, but what does that require? That requires you to pull out a token generator and, it's extra steps, and consumers really don't like that. But we need that security in order to make sure that someone's not going to steal our identity. So I think what we're working on, and I think others in our industry are working on, hey, is there a way that we maybe can combine things that are with us all the time, like biometrics, with really good anti-spoofing and liveness detection for the capture of the biometric, to provide kind of a convenient and very secure way to not only, because essentially these digital identities are almost certainly going to be stored in a decentralized way in a wallet on your mobile device initially, or on your computer or something like that, much like with cryptocurrency. But then the question is, how do you unlock that? Where do you keep the key for that, right? And if you put the key on your monitor, it's not too safe. If you throw it away, then you've just lost it. So possibly we can come up with secure ways to unlock that information with biometrics and possibly other data to make it really convenient and really secure.
Yeah,
but the fraudsters will be fraudsters.
Paper wallet is not the safest option, that's for sure. Megan, sure that you say that it's a lot of legal issues related to the identity, but also expecting that everything is in the right way, and we got identity and the person that it's going into one of these metaverses. What's legal issues that we can have from a financial point of view or data privacy? Because I think there are other things that we say, okay, we're jumping into the metaverse. For sure, data will be there, will be stored. Who owns that data? Could anyone use it? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating how Stephen is talking about the different levels of identification. I think that there's, from my perspective, there's this trade-off between anti-fraud, which I think too, as Steve said, and I know Carlos, there is no completely fraudulent anti-environment that prevents all fraud. We certainly don't live in that environment now, so I don't know why we would, anticipate that environment in the future. And certainly when we had even all cash environments, it was actually much, much worse. So let's say that we're improving. But when you think about all of the things that Stephen has spoken about in terms of increasing the amount of security that we have around our data to prevent identity theft, which is of course anti-fraudulent, making sure that you protect yourself. This is all coming about at the same time when you have incredibly nationalistic, well, not just nationalistic, but protections now being seen in terms of privacy rights. I think that the US has traditionally been, behind the curve on that, but of course we're slowly getting up the curve. And, you've got Europe, of course, with the GDPR and becoming much more aggressive in that, aggressive in terms of data transfers. You have China putting in place huge data protection laws, which are very nationalistic. So, at the same time, you have the need to essentially provide and have more different factors of authentication, which protect your identity, but at the same time means that you need to provide some more information that is your personal identifiable information in order to get that security. So I think there's a real tension there, the way that we have the privacy advocates developing and the way that we have the technology developing for, obvious reasons. And, I think that a lot of this kind of goes to the core of what anti-money laundering and financial crimes compliance, anti-fraud has been at for a while, which is that, you need to be able to identify and verify identities. And at the same time, they are very imperfect. So moving more towards, and nobody really loves government driven things, but having the governments more involved in this, in particular, to allow those who traditionally haven't been able to potentially have a lot of identification information enter into the metaverse and virtual environments, have access to financial services, which are going to be, we already have banks opening in the metaverse. There's more that have bought digital land. So I think you're going to see more and more financial services moving there once everybody knows what the full gambit of that is. That need to identify and verify to prevent fraud, to prevent theft, versus how we are going to govern the privacy of that, especially in a biometric environment, which I think is probably from a privacy perspective, the most controversial, is going to be, I think, a very interesting way of working at things, how that's going to develop. I think we're going to see the beginnings of that. I think we're already seeing the beginnings of it in terms of what Europe is doing, but I think that you're going to see a lot more of that in the next few years in terms of enforcement actions. And then the technology people are going to be put under a lot of pressure to try to deal with the legal issues on the back ends.
Sure about that. 100% agree with that, that all regulation will start to implement and we got lots of things to do. And Stephen pointed out that regulation is good at certain points, but not struggling that technology could bring us a new future. So related to that, Carlos, I think that Meta will be one of the biggest players instead of South Korea that now it's leading because have all these major users from Facebook platform. How do you think that consumers will adapt to this new meta or metaverses? Because they are not professional, they are not techie person, are people that will jump into the metaverse using the Oculus or any other kind of devices. What's your approach to that?
With regard to the first concept that you said, Meta is going to be one of the players, right, proposing a metaverse, and we're going to have to earn the position in the market that we aspire to have, for sure. Regarding the adoption, yeah, it is very clear that leisure is the initial space. So this is why gaming and the social interaction is driving at the moment the adoption of metaverse technologies, I would say in general. But we definitely see a lot of serious business or public sector adoption. For instance, for some years already, this technology has been used to rehabilitate very dangerous prisoners, right? So having the therapists interact with people at a distance, so that they're not physically in the same location, and then the therapist can actually use a wider variety of techniques to interact with and hopefully try to rehabilitate the offender, the convicted offender, I would say. Generally speaking, we have a lot to do yet to define what is that safety space for people to collaborate. We have a journalist in the US called Kate Snow that already made an initial report on some of the obscure places that are emerging, and it's inevitable. This is strip bar, and actually she talked about how easy it was for a child to enter it when using the metaverse. Our societies are definitely changing, particularly in Europe. I would say that there is a phenomenon, this clear phenomenon where liberty and security are kind of going more on the side of security as the societies age. And there's a French philosopher called Alain Damasio that has actually been analyzing this phenomenon. So we're being a lot more tolerant of intrusive ways to record and to analyze behavior in order to gain additional security. And this trend is likely to get accentuated, particularly in Europe, I would say. And this is where you're going to see legislation that is probably not going to fly necessarily around the world, but the way that GDPR was adopted around the world, I would predict that what the EU directives around AI are not likely to have the same level of acceptance. So this is very much a terrain that we're going to see develop quite a lot in the coming years, and it's going to be a big feast for legal firms. So it's going to generate actually quite a lot of employment, frankly, for lawyers, because there is so much to define in that area. And let me close my little monologue here by saying that the commerce is really the holy grail of metaverse, right? We already see for instance, from the way that brands use Instagram at the moment, that the interaction with their customers is changing very fundamentally. So the multiverse gives brands an opportunity to enrich the way that they interact and actually they personalize the experience that their customers have. So we expect quite a lot of very exciting new development of offerings that are going to be led by brands, particularly the consumer goods that are generally used. That personalization of interaction is going to lead to much richer and novel experiences for consumers.
Oh, then that we got almost more or less what's going on from the business here. I will ask Stephen from your experience in Mitek, do you think that anyone could survive without being in the metaverses? That could leave anyone's, will not be entered to that, because if the digital identity goes to this new world, new era, I think that everyone will be forced, will push it to be there. What's your thoughts about it?
Well, I think Megan touched on this a little bit earlier, or at least the part of it that I'm really focused on now and concerned about in the future is that we already see with the digital technology out there today that there are issues with diversity and bias and inclusion, right? Mitek works a lot with biometrics. We work a lot with very big banks that are heavily regulated, and they're extremely concerned about any accuracy differences, the way you might look at it from a technology perspective, that result in demographic bias against certain classes of individuals, right? That's already a problem. And I think it's already getting a lot of focus, which is great, but I think that could continue to be a problem. The other dynamic that we see is that there's a digital divide in our world today, and it's a very clear digital divide. In fact, we saw it very clearly in the US when the pandemic hit and students had to move to virtual and online classes, right? Well, students in more affluent areas that had access to good internet and devices and that sort of thing generally did okay. But then there's a whole category of students who don't have those advantages. And some school districts weren't able to help them. So they had a very bad experience, right? So I think that's a very recent example of how it can go really bad if there's a requirement or an advantage, right, to being in the metaverse and people don't have equal access. So I think this is going to be a really healthy topic for quite some time.
Megan, your legal perspective regarding to that?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because I consider when I look at the metaverse, I look at it as a part or the fintech industry in particular as fundamental to what the metaverse is going to be, because there's going to have to be movement of money to have commerce within the metaverse and all the rest of it. So, and what you see in terms of I think the fintech arena in total. So when you kind of look at fintechs and technology versus traditional banking, let's say, you actually do see more inclusion. There's a statistic that it really increased the number of unbanked people in the world. An easy example and a kind of older one is, I think, the M-Pesa system in Kenya, where you had a largely cash-based society move essentially completely to a digital society very quickly, and allow digital transfers of funds and allow people to have access to systems that they never had before. I think that that's important because if you can't access the kind of traditional banking systems, you kind of are taken out of commerce, and then you see that they have a lot more trouble running businesses and a lot more trouble earning money and a lot more trouble kind of being into the current economy. So when I think about kind of the metaverse and where we're going in terms of inclusion, it does have that ability to really increase that even further. But at the same time, Stephen's absolutely right. There is a digital divide. So that does mean that we need to, it's probably going to have to be a lot of investment by a lot of different places, and seeing the metaverse as something real that is going to happen. I think any new technology, there's always winners and losers, unfortunately. And we tend not to kind of plan for helping, let's say, the people who lose out within that, which always unfortunately tend to be the people who are disadvantaged to begin with. So we can plan to help with that, but I think it's something that has to be consciously done, because otherwise, some of the inclusive things that have been happening through mobile technology that have really increased financial inclusion, if we move into more of a fully digital environment that takes a lot more electricity, takes a lot more internet bandwidth, those things may actually fall to the wayside. And just another note in terms of that is, if we move to a fully decentralized system or a more decentralized system, that does create, it's kind of interesting, because I think the metaverse and the environment are actually also very connected. because if we move to a decentralized environment, it actually takes a lot more energy to run, especially if we do a lot more things on blockchain, which is kind of, I think, what a lot of people think that we may be entering into. And how do we, maintain our environmental standards, especially in lower income countries, which have a lot more trouble producing energy, and how are they still able to then go onto the blockchain? So it's just, everything becomes interconnected in these things, I think, in a really interesting way. But, I think that's inclusion, environment, and financial services all roll together in many ways.
Yeah, you just mentioned the word decentralized, or at least one of the DLT technologies are blockchain. People say or mention that maybe the metaverse is the catalysis for all these disruptive technology, also including big data, Internet of Things. And so from your perspective as experts on that, do you think that it's really the truth that all this technology will jump into the metaverse and will be a total change, or at least will become once again centralized, controlled by, as Megan said at the beginning of the session, by 3 or 4 players? Stephen, what do you think about that?
I'll keep my answer brief because I'm sure Carlos has a lot to say about it too. I think it's going to be sort of like, evolutional technology in the past, right? I think there's going to be certain parts of society that try to grab the decentralization because that means less interference from enterprises and from governments. But at the same time, I think those kind of central powers, if you will, whether it's in commerce or government, they're going to want to get that power back, right? Decentralized currency, cryptocurrency, right, is a threat to governments because they like to be able to control their finance, their currencies, right? Decentralized identity is somewhat of a threat to companies because they want to know as much as they can about their customers, right? And they mine that data for a lot of business value. Whether it's legal or not, that's how companies look at it. So I think it's definitely going to be a push and a pull. And I don't know where it's going to land up. It's probably going to land up as some kind of a mix of the two.
Okay, Carlos, your turn.
Gosh, well, there's a lot to unpack from what Stephen and Megan said. I'm going to look east once again, because I don't think we look east often enough. China, for instance, cracked down big time on Bitcoin mining. They rightfully saw that as a threat to the economic development because of the massive consumption of electricity that it requires. So they have the Communist Party in China has the ability to, from one day to the next, say, okay, Bitcoin is illegal, get the hell out, and people got the hell out. They started to mine in Russia, in Iran, places where electricity consumption generates a lot of pollution, as much, if not more, than in China. Another point that was made in China is that all of this time spent in gaming is time that the children are not spending acquiring knowledge and skills. They cracked down big time on gaming, and even on video conference-based teaching platforms, edtech, if you will. So yeah, I think the governments are becoming more militant, and they need to be. Second point, I would say, IT, we don't really know, but we think that IT consumes about 8% of the world production of electricity. What Megan said is really, really important, because if we think that we are already consuming quite a lot of electricity, the metaverse technologies are just in a completely different order of magnitude here. People talk about, for instance, photorealistic avatars in the multiverse. I mean, you would not believe the amount of inferences. So these are, it's a machine learning term, but is what you have to be doing almost in real time in order to produce these very ephemeral versions of yourself in the internet. So when you look at the current energy problem that we have worldwide, and you think that, okay, well, now we're going to define this new technology that is going to require 10x consumption of electricity, I'm not sure that those two actually quite fit at the moment. And there's probably a horizon of time where we may have a lot of technology and not the energy capacity to deliver it. And this is going to be a particularly tough problem for those demographics that do not have reliable access to electricity or indeed to devices. We've seen this already, okay? There's many countries in the world where children did not have access to compute devices over the last 2 years, and many of them have actually lost 2 years of schooling because of COVID and the closing and opening of schools. So these are real social issues, real social, and we need answers, and we need governments to be collaborating very closely with private industry in anticipating and addressing them.
Well, I think that we just covered almost all the hot topics that we got in the Metaverse. I think that it's nearly time for answering the question that the audience has provided. If you want to create a closing, or what's your thoughts about the Metaverse in 1 minute, each of you, what are, from your perspective, from your experience, or from your field, that will be the major leap or major change? Please go ahead, just show that there's something more about it, because I think that the Metaverse, we can be talking for ages. Megan, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think my closing thoughts on the Metaverse, just my overall thoughts on it are cautious optimism. I think with all technology, it has the ability to, not all, but this technology in particular has the ability to revolutionize and help major parts of society. But something that really needs to be, I think we should really think it through in a really think through these issues a little bit more deeply. I think we have previews of issues coming from, the last 20 years, and, not to forget the lessons learned in terms of what's happened currently, and to, maybe make that next environment, the Metaverse environment, more of something that, provides and protects, and we get the benefits without as many of the drawbacks.
Okay, then we got several questions to that. Stephen, go first, and then Carlos, your closing, please.
Fantastic. Well, I agree with Megan. I am an optimist. I believe everything's going to work out. It'll all be fine. But there's a lot of work that we all have to do in order to make that a reality, right? I'm going for utopia, not dystopia. I think some challenging things, though, right? We're going to ask our governments. They have to provide guidance and leadership, but not too much, right? We don't want them to get too in the middle of it, but they have to help us with the right level of regulation and requirement, so that industry and society can kind of coexist in this Metaverse. Super excited about it. A lot of great problems to solve, and I think it actually, at the end of the day, allows us to work on some of the social issues that are plaguing the world.
Carlos, your closing.
All right. I think in the panel it's good to have contrasting views. And with Stephen's forbearance, I'm going to actually say that I would like more government, if not intervention, at least more interest, more dialogue. We need a model a little closer to China's, where they have some really top talent in the government who understand the market, who talk with companies, who see the trends, and then collaborate, hopefully, to anticipate what is likely to happen, so that then we can put the needed guardrails around the technology and not have to be reactive to them. I have to be honest with you, I don't see that at the moment. I don't see the governments at all having that level of interest or motivation to understand what we're doing in private industry. Having said that, the economic opportunity in front of us is huge. We are reaching full employment in a lot of countries around the world, and these technologies are actually a major driving force of generating economic opportunity and more equality. So with the proviso that people have access to things like energy, like devices and the necessary equipment, which is not a lot, I mean, it's not super expensive, right? We do have a playing field where a lot of new creative people are going to be able to come and provide economic value, including, for instance, artists. which is an area where I think creators are going to have a bigger field to collaborate in economic development in the metaverse. So yeah, I mean, cautious optimism, as Megan put it, is definitely where I would say, and I would also like to make a call for public sector actors to get more involved.
Well, I think that the both three, you just resume all the 3 point of view, from the digital identity, from the technology point of view, and also from the legal perspective. There are some questions about it. The first, it's going related to digital identity from the biometric point of view. That's for you, Stephen, that which alternative do we have to biometric for secure digital identity? Biometrics cannot be changed. They can be copied and they can be then generally used for organization, governments that wants to use it against citizens and people identify. I think that people is worried about it.
It's a great question. And, we often hear you can change your password, but you can't change your face. And that's a big problem, right? That's probably the primary reason why we focus so much on, in general, anti-spoofing and specifically liveness detection when it comes to trusting a biometric sample, right? But there are other mechanisms, right? But here's the challenge. The real challenge is Mitek participates largely in what's known as new user onboarding, right? So think about a company that's accepting a new user for the very first time. They're meeting them for the very first time, so that user has to prove who they are. Once they proved who they are, then they can use many forms of digital identity to access the service in an ongoing basis. But it's that initial proving who you are, and it's a really hard problem, right? Is it government issued identity documents? Not everyone has those. Is it a rental or a lease agreement? Is it a utility bill? Right? There's all these things. So it's a really hard problem. I believe that biometrics are powerful because something you know, something you have, and something you are. Biometrics are something you are. But for that very reason, we also have to treat them very, very securely. And I think that it's a great question. I don't know that we have a great answer for it right now, but we're working hard on it.
Thank you very much, Stephen. The second question is more related to Meta, and it's the worry about what are the implications of a centralized decentralization? That the biggest players, they called FANG, well, now will be MANG, they got almost everything in this metaverses. That we got this Meta, we got Microsoft that will buy most of the lands that will be created in the metaverse, so that will create a centralized decentralization. Carlos, what do you think? That could be an issue, or it's something that will happen that way?
No, I think we're a little obsessed about the big tech. Once again, look east, please. We have plenty of examples of companies competing very successfully. The most notable is ByteDance, right? A few years ago, a bunch of young engineers started this concept called TikTok, and I guess they didn't know that they couldn't compete against Facebook, right? I guess what happened, they got very successful at it. So there's no reason why we couldn't see very, very large players emerging in the metaverse.
Well, that's great. Next question, it's more generic. I think that Megan could start, but Carlos and Stephen also can jump it out. But what are the main benefits for society as a whole in this metaverse? Megan, what do you think about?
Yeah, so I think that the metaverse, there's multiple benefits. Kind of going through some of the stuff I spoke about earlier. If we can move into more of a virtual world, for instance, where healthcare resources can be shared more between countries, where you can allow healthcare to go to less developed countries in a virtual format that works. That would be a huge benefit to a lot of countries. Sharing of information, sharing of ideas. In terms of just workplace and allowing people to be together without in a 3D environment without being together. I think we're on a Zoom right now. I think we're all a little tired of Zoom after the last couple of years, but allowing ourselves to interact in a virtual environment that feels real, I think would be, a huge benefit, bringing people together between cultures. Also, I think it's harder in many ways for if we have a truly decentralized metaverse and this can go in both ways, both directions. But if you think of, free speech and content moderation, which is a very, highly charged issue, and I know both sides of the argument, but you can allow, more ideas to flow more freely throughout borders, which may have both benefits and drawbacks. Obviously, as we had mentioned, the financial services aspect of it as well, allowing more people potentially to access financial services through the metaverse. And also, I like the comment that was made about artists and them, kind of having more of a place and more of a role. Artists I think that's really interesting because they are creating a lot of NFTs, a lot of digital art that's being used. So really having this whole new environment for more people to participate in, I think is going to be a net gain.
Stephen, Carlos, anything to point it out, or do you think that's pretty clear what Megan said?
It was to me.
Okay. Then another question we got it's I think that's related to we got it that it was racial diversity. They are not worried about how they can jump in this technology, but if you think that maybe the metaverse will mitigate or will decrease that, there will be less focus on these physical aspects, skin color, for example. Stephen, do you think that this will be helpful or will decrease this problematic?
Well, I think it could be helpful, but as I said earlier, we have to be really careful about how we design our models and algorithms, and in the machine learning world, we have to be very careful about the data we use to train them on, right? Or else we could unintentionally increase the bias out there, right? I believe that's a temporary thing, though, and I think that we're at the end of the day, I think that we're going to find the metaverse to be much more inclusive. Hopefully not because people are hiding behind an avatar, but hopefully because it just allows people to interact with each other in a way that they have more exposure to more cultures and more people and more ideas than they did in the past.
Okay, and the last question that we got today, it's more related about what Carlos said, that there's really importance in labor in the metaverse, that new jobs that will be created. Do you think that sure that people will work 100%? I always make jokes to my friend that, well, the best job in the world could be the gardener in Minecraft. So a gardener in the metaverse could be a great job, or just joking? What do you think, this kind of jobs? Carlos, for example, go ahead. Yeah, new jobs that will be created related to metaverse.
I don't know about that specific example, but
I was just joking about it. Do you think that will be created several jobs related to metaverse, not only from a tech point of view, but do you think that this will be 100% jobs that will be take place in the metaverse?
Yeah, I mean, we can categorically affirm that that will be the case. And you already see this happening even outside of the metaverse. And it is a logical consequence of the evolution of technology. Just to give an example, you can use artificial intelligence now to analyze surgical operations, and then you document them automatically. This technology is available now, so it uses computer vision. It analyzes what the surgeon is doing, where it cuts, what incision it makes, what organs it is touching, and then it generates a report automatically that then other surgeons can take a look at. Whether you do that in the metaverse or not doesn't really matter. The evolution is clearly there, and it makes knowledge and experience more easily transportable from one person to another. And the same can be applied. You can use the metaverse, for instance, to train people, vocational training. Particularly, think about very dangerous situations, manipulating toxic materials, for instance, or fixing electrical problems in turbines. It is currently being used for those applications, right? So the people who think about creating those environments in the metaverse and then make them useful, these are completely new jobs for everybody in whatever area you want to apply it. And at the moment, I really struggle to think of areas where the metaverse is not applicable for this kind of training and development. So yes, that is on a practical side. On the leisure side, it's even bigger, right? The way that people do gaming at the moment, and I will yield to Steven so he can comment on that further, has evolved a lot in the last few years. And if you compare that to what we were doing with Super Mario 20 years ago, it's just a completely different area, isn't it, Steven?
Sorry, I was searching for my mute button. Absolutely. And for the record, though, I've been playing since before Super Mario Brothers as well. You know, the dynamic that kind of excites me is actually one of the nice outcomes of the pandemic, right? When companies were forced to go virtual, right? I noticed in my neighborhood a lot more families out walking together, a lot more outdoor activities, and people weren't spending the hours in the car a day. At least that's the way it is on the West Coast in California, commuting to and from work. Right? They're able to live where they want and maintain the job they want in a virtual way. Now, of course, this doesn't work for everybody, but our company was fortunate. We're a digital company, we're a software company, and we're distributed all over the world already. So, we are now at Mitek. We're not going back to the physical office. We're still going to keep our offices. People can still get together, but we're a virtual first company, right? Which gives us the freedom to hire anywhere, essentially, right? And it gives our employees the freedom to essentially live anywhere they want. And I think that's a really great outcome.
So Megan, from a legal perspective, to close this event, do you think that there are lots of things metaverse lawyers will be created too?
Well, I love the comment earlier that we will have, full employment for lawyers with artificial intelligence law. We'd love to see that. That being said, I do think that, the metaverse is going to create a lot of new legal issues that should be dealt with. And, hopefully the government will get on top of these issues, but are, novel and where we should be and legally and ethically, I think will continue to be a very important industry for the legal industry and for others. And, looking into the future, we're really looking forward to, we love brainstorming with everybody who does tech things because, it gets us out of kind of, going from law books to what actually works in reality. And, I think the legal industry has a huge part to play in this because there are so many legal issues. And, we want to make sure that we maintain certain things from the past, but make sure they apply well to the future.
Okay, well, I think that we are on time. It was perfect. I think that we just covered all the topics, all the necessary steps. I would like to thank you all three for your time, for being there today. It has been perfect. Now I'm a little bit wiser on the metaverse. I know a little bit more. I think that the audience will know more about it. And I hope to see you once again. Maybe we should join to clarify if all these things that we've been discussing became reality or not in the following months. So thank you very much, Steven, Carlos, Megan. It's been a pleasure from my side. To the audience, we see you the next 12th of May in the new session of the Metaverse. And thank you very much for your time. Yeah, and have a great afternoon, morning, or wherever you stay. Have a lovely day.